there and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. This is a magic show exploring the history of Magic the Gathering set by set. Today we're finishing our look at Urza's Saga, the large fall set released in 1998, exploring the beginning of Urza's life as a planeswalker. This is part 3 of a 3-part series, so if you haven't seen the earlier episodes, you may want to catch up by clicking here. Last time, we looked at the signature cards of the set from the first 4 colors of Magic, and today we're looking at the green cards and the artifact cards. We'll also take a look at the most expensive spells, and discuss exactly what Urza Saga meant to the game, and how it influenced later sets. Why listen to my stories? Because my stories are best stories. In 1998, prior to the release of Saga, green was the worst color in Magic, hands down. It had no mass removal, it had no way to deal with enemy creatures outside combat, and it didn't have the cheapest or best creatures. Red usually had that privilege. Every year, players who loved green prayed for new, better creatures. So what did Urza's Saga provide them with? Well, for starters, there was a bright, shiny new draw engine. Abundance, 2GG, did absolutely nothing when it hit the table, but for the rest of the game, you had the choice of drawing your choice, either a land or a non-land spell, for every card that you would normally draw. No longer would you flood out. The immediate combo was combining this with Sylvan Library to get 3 replacements for draws, and you wouldn't have to put any of the cards back or pay life. But that was a Type 1 thing, and in Saga Standard, this didn't quite work out. Argothian Enchantress was only the second Enchantress printed in Magic's history, costing 1 less than the original ABU's Verduran Enchantress. And enemy removal couldn't take it out, but then again, Argothian Enchantress has a serious drawback in that you couldn't enchant it either. This was very deliberate Shroud. Of course, Enchantress decks usually focus more on enchanting lands and just putting global enchantments on the table, rather than putting auras on creatures so they could produce more and more stuff. So the drawback at the time wasn't that big a deal. Later Enchantress designs focused on stacking things on creatures. Carpet of Flowers is one of the more popular color hosers in Magic. I don't want to go off about color hosers and how unfun they were for a long time, as Saga has many of the game's most abusive ones. Hibernation, for example, oh, sure. Why not handicap the only real win condition for green? Yeah, that's really fair. But Carpet of Flowers is probably the most pleasant, kind hoser out there. It doesn't penalize the other player for playing islands, it just gives you a crap ton of mana instead and dashes out before counter magic. This is exploitation, but not punishment. Hooray! Also, that Rebecca Guayard, man, I love this card. Exploration is an amazing card. This card lets you break the 1 land drop rule. This is a fixed version of ABU's Fast Bond, in that it only lets you drop 1 more land, but some decks don't mind. The standard combo that went with this card was Stronghold's Horn of Greed, and Zvi Moshkwitz used this synergy to fuel the old Extended's powerful and resilient Turbo Land deck, which I talked about a little bit last time. I've used this card to fuel turns where I draw 10 or more cards. There are more powerful cards out there like Azusa, Lost but Seeking, but when it comes to board development, there's no card I like more than Exploration. It's on my list of 5 favorite cards of all time. One of the most powerful creature combo enablers is Fecundity, 2G for a symmetrical enchantment that lets players draw cards whenever their creatures die. Fecundity is especially effective in token decks, which may manage to take a humble Raise the Alarm and turn it into a 2-card draw spell. At 3 mana, this is extremely affordable and a great countermeasure against decks with lots of sweepers. I'm amazed that this is Modern legal, to be honest. Now, if Modern wasn't so filled with Delvers and Tarmogoyfs and other ridiculous combos, someone might find a way to turn this into a component of a broken deck. Another incredibly powerful draw engine in Urza Saga is Greater Good, an enchantment that allows you to sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 cards. This has been used in numerous combo decks, particularly in Ravnica-era Standard by several Japanese deck builders. Again, like Abundance, Greater Good requires a 4-mana investment and doesn't advance your board state at all, but it does create the potential for explosive combos in ramp decks. In casual multiplayer games, people who've seen Greater Good in action know how easily it can let a player run away with the game. Priest of Titania is the most powerful 2-mana elf. Priest can easily tap for 3 or 4 mana on turn 3. A staple of Legacy and casual elf decks, the Priest breaks numerous rules. This card was designed during an era where designers were the developers and vice versa. And a 2-mana card that can produce more than 1 mana, well, yeah, that should have set off numerous red flags. By no means is Priest of Titania the set's most powerful card, but it is the set's most powerful constructed common, and it did create a renaissance in elf combo decks. Wizards has always had a desire for green to have evasion, but not flying. After Legends Killer Bees, there weren't any new green flyers that got played in tournaments until Champions of Kamigawa with JigginJonT, the worst of the legendary Spirit Dragon cycle. The traditional green form of evasion has been Trample, just using sheer size to smash over littler guys. But on occasion, we do get a variant, the Treetop ability. Treetop Rangers, seen here, can only be blocked by flyers as they dash and jump across the canopy. Other common green cards with this ability include Silhana Ledgewalker, Treetop Bracers, Canopy Cover, and Orchard Spirits. Another version that has come up recently is the can't be blocked by creatures with power less than X, as seen on Den Protector. You could make an argument that this parkour-like ability really debuted on Legends Elven Riders, but Elven Riders have problems with walls as well as flyers. Getting stopped by walls? That's for clumsy oafs. If you happen to love parkour, now you know where it is in the color pie thanks to Treetop Rangers. More so than Mirage or Tempest, Urza Saga was in part an attempt to recapture many of the broken, powerful cards from 1993 to 1994. One of 93's famous cards was Arabian Nights Gazban Ogres, a 2/2 for G that would jump sides and defect from your control if someone had more life than you. Play Gazban Ogre on turn 1, and barring a jarring enemy lightning bolt, or more humiliatingly, a healing salve, well, okay, that shouldn't be a problem. But if your opponent did manage to have more life than you, well, you're in trouble. Urza Saga tried to overcome this problem by letting out Wild Dogs. Sacrificing a point of toughness for cycling let the players ditch the dogs in a hurry if they were drawn late in the game. Wild Dogs was a key element in the mono-green Senor Stumpy aggro deck, whose curve ended at 2. If you've got more mana than you know what to do with, and want to get the creatures you need, Citadel Flute will fill the hole. With an initial 5 mana investment, you can then tap the flute and tutor up any creature you pay X for. Then just cast it, and you're all set up. Despite the huge amount of mana available in Urza Saga, this was too expensive to see tournament play. If you'd like to put exotic powerful cards in your cube, hey, Citadel Flute is definitely worth a try. Here's an odd-looking card that deserves context. Check this out. Claws of Gix. 0 mana artifact that lets you sacrifice a permanent to gain a life. It seems really underwhelming. Why did such a card exist? Well, there actually was a good reason. Claws of Gix was designed to host buyback, a major mechanic from Tempest Block. How do you counter a buyback spell for good? By removing its targets, which will make the spell fail to resolve, and because it fails to resolve, the returning to hand is part of the spell resolving, so it goes to the graveyard instead. So sacrificing a creature or a land instead of letting it get bounced by Capsize is a blow, but buyback control was a very viable strategy at the end of Tempest's run in Standard, and so a cheap artifact that ducked past counter magic was playable. The existence of Fluctuator didn't really shift all that much in Saga Block Constructed, but it did make quite a bit of shift for designing Onslaught, the next set with cycling. See, in Saga Block, all cycling costs are the same, 2 colorless. Even the cycles from play cards in Urza's Destiny, such as Yavimaya Elder, cost 2, although they don't get affected by Fluctuator. So if you build an Onslaught deck with cycling cards that trigger abilities like Lightning Rift and Astral Slide, it's easy to break those combos open if it takes 0 mana to cycle. Onslaught dealt with that problem by adding colored mana to many of the cycling cards. The cycling lands only cost 1 to cycle, but it has to be one of the appropriate color, which Fluctuator won't help you with. Part of that was the natural process of design evolving returning mechanics so that it was different, but another significant element is avoiding an even more broken combo. With that said, no one used Fluctuator in Saga Block. This was a swing and a miss. Grafted Skullcap is another Deal with the Devil card, but at least all colors get to take the risk. By discarding your hand at the end of every turn, you get an additional draw step. Enterprising deck builders immediately combine this with Ensnaring Bridge from Stronghold to make enemy attackers a non-issue. I myself have used this combination before when it was around in Standard for the second time, using Judgment's Guilt Feeder to sneak through and deal lots of damage. If you've ever considered the appeal of attacking with 0 power creatures, or creatures that pump for the win, look into the Grafted Skullcam. It's a card draw engine that blue, a color that normally loves card draw, won't even touch. And Sarkhan, Dragon Speaker, also owes its ultimate to this card's design. Lifeline is an aggravating design for people who want to keep the board clean. If non-token creature dies, but a survivor remains on the table, no matter what side of the board that creature is on, then all the dead come back at the end of turn. Lifeline isn't cheap, it's symmetrical, but it's an artifact that will utterly alter the flow of play. Combine this with death triggers or enter the battlefield triggers, well, I'm sure you can figure it out. The templating isn't up to current standards, but I'm sure that if you try out Lifeline in casual games or EDH games, you'll definitely have some interesting stories to share of your exploits. Exploit, yeah, that's another card that goes well with Lifeline. I mean, mechanic that goes with Lifeline. Here's yet another creature hoser, Noetic Scales. This set, let me tell you, it does not like creatures. Noetic Scales will continually keep fatties off the table unless their controller has a grip full of cards. But the continual bounce does allow for many possibilities with recasting them over and over with ETB triggers. Noetic Scales won't win you any friends at the commander table, but it's worth trying once. Magic is a game of resource management, and few cards make that more transparent than Phyrexian Processor. If you want to make 10/10 tokens every turn, this card makes it possible. The fact that the minions created are black, the color most resistant to spot removal, is also incredibly relevant. This artifact was essential in John Finkel's efforts to take down the Great One, Bob Maher, in the finals of Worlds in 2000. And if you'd like to see that match in action, click on this link. Many have called it one of the greatest matches on camera of all time. So if you want to try big risks for big rewards and try to play like Finkel, then you want Phyrexian Processor. I should make a list of top 10 cruelest artifacts. You know, those cards that players love to hate, cards that make games miserable. One of these I recently saw in action at 2014's Eternal Weekend was Smokestack. Smokestack costs 4 and adds soot counters on your upkeep. For each soot counter on it, players have to sacrifice permanents on their upkeep. Of course, the controller of the Smokestack can alleviate the sacrifice by putting the soot counter increase on the stack, then the sacrifice on the stack. In this fashion, they get to suffer from the Smokestack the least. This card is incredibly powerful and an archetype in of itself. So be really careful using this in casual games, as it will draw a ton of heat and people will remember it in future games. Now, I don't think this card draws an unfair amount of heat, because you probably deserved it, but yeah, that's a lot of heat. Magic has many cards representing different fictional tropes, and one of the most fantastic is the Time Machine. And while Magic does have a card called Time Machine, this is the black bordered version. Temporal Aperture is cheap to play, expensive to activate, and shuffles your library to offer a random card off the top that you can play for free. Yeah, free? I told you that the mana system really gets warped in this set. Now, there is another Time Machine in Magic, but it's got the silver border. For casual players who like the luck of the draw, this is some Aperture science you won't want to miss out on. Of course I had to make a Portal joke. This is a video on YouTube that talks about gaming. It's mandatory. The fact that Wizards reprinted Pestilence in the set with Urza's Armor, a 6-mana artifact that prevents 1 damage to you every time damage would be dealt, is no surprise. Now, the armor doesn't protect your creatures, only yourself, but token swarms will have fits dealing with this artifact. Also note Urza appearing on the art. This was controversial since such a key figure in the game's lore had remained unseen up to this point. The art directors had avoided putting the images of planeswalkers on cards so as to increase their mystique. The first time Urza showed up on card art front and center was in Exodus with Mind Over Matter, after being mentioned all the way back in ABU 5 years before. Planeswalkers get to be special. Now, in Saga, Urza is only identifiable on 4 of the set's 335 cards, unlike Tempest Block, which is chock full of images of the Weatherlight crew. You'd think that Urza would show up in the Antiquities, the set about his conflict and victory over Mishra, but nope. Zansha, a relatively minor character in Saga story with no actual legend card, appears in considerably more art than the set's namesake. The mana artifacts in Saga are Worn Power Stone, a 3-drop that taps for 2, and Voltaic Key, a 1-mana artifact that untaps other artifacts. Voltaic Key is extremely well known in Vintage as the combo partner of Time Vault, setting up infinite turns. This is why Vintage players will play Tezzeret the Seeker, to go into infinite turns. Anytime you see Voltaic Key, you know that your opponent is going to try to do something broken. And usually, yeah, they'll succeed. Let's take a short break to check out the top 10 most expensive cards in Urza Saga at the time of this video. Final verdict. Urza Saga had a lot of problems with its creation. Research and development wanted to create a block about enchantments. The creative department had the ear of the company execs and told them that in order to follow up on the success of Tempest Block, they wanted the next block to be about Urza and artifacts. So Wizards followed up with a design that showed the power of artifice and mana. We got to take a close look at the Phyrexians, though there wasn't a clear mechanical element aside from generic black tropes. We got a closer look at the lives altered by Urza and his 2 blunders, first by getting involved in the Brothers' War, despoiling our Argothian forest, and his second blunder, his ill-considered jaunt into Phyrexia, which led to the downfall of Sarah's realm. Seriously, Urza made 2 serious mistakes and spent millennia repenting and attempting to compensate for them. The guy is a tragic figure, but certainly not wholly sympathetic since he crafted his own crises as much as he crafted his own war machines. In his own words, Mark Rosewater describes Urza Saga as kind of a mess-up. He was both a designer and a developer since the 2 roles hadn't been differentiated nearly as much. And so the idea that people would execute on and the ideas that people had were one on the same. And he wasn't wrong. I mean, creating cool concepts for mechanics and cards doesn't mean that they're ready for being played out in the wild. Tempest was the most powerful dynamic block that had been printed in years. It was a major hit, and Wizards wanted to keep the momentum going. The problem is, Urza Saga followed the fastest block ever to that point with an even faster block in tournament settings, and casual players had to make sure that their friends were kept in check if they wanted to have fun kitchen table games. This was escalation to an unwanted level. The joke goes, the early game is the die roll to determine play draw, the mid game is mulliganing to figure out what the hands are, and then the late game is turn 1. That's what happens with Academy decks. Now, Tempest created the golden triangle of aggro, control, and combo. And yes, today in 2016, combo has been more or less supplanted by midrange, but this golden triangle is at the crux of most Magic formats and all healthy ones. Aggro, control, and combo are two adjunct archetypes that pop up, but they're secondary to the golden triangle. And less than a year after that triangle had been created and established for the first time, Urza Saga went and wrecked it. What were the outcomes of Urza Saga? Standard tournament attendance was horribly damaged. Many early veterans dropped out due to the degenerate combos of Standard. This was a massive problem, and there were a ton of banned cards that ended up warping numerous formats. Rosewater is in many ways the leading salesperson for the game, and he points out that the good that came out of Urza Saga? Wizards hired pro players from the Pro Tour to handle game development so that there wouldn't be too many broken cards in the future. Now, these new hires included people like Worth Wolpert, Randy Buehler, Henry Stern, Elaine Chase, and Brian Schneider. And later pros included Aaron Forsythe, Mike Turian, Alan Cummer, and Dave Humphreys, all Hall of Famers in their own right, as well as huge influences on the game itself. Now, the pro players who entered Wizards created a divide between design and development and set up the excellence of Invasion 2 years later. Now, this was an incredibly awesome turnaround for the game, and it was fairly quickly implemented. But we also had so many broken cards printed that will never be unprinted. Allow me to reiterate. No other set has taken such liberties with the mana system as much as Urza Saga. In the world with lands that only tap for a single mana, a lot of the cards would have been fine. But in a world with Tolarian Academy or Gaia's Cradle, they were a recipe for disaster. If we had had cycles like Ravnica's Karuz, lands that tap for 2 colors, they'd have been warping, but since those lands are fairly slow and picky and only getting 1 extra mana per Karu per untapped spell, it wouldn't have been as bad, and they also only really come online on turn 3. So, you know what? I'm fine with Alliance's pitch spells ignoring the mana system, since those pitch spells were one-time defensive effects, but the free spells of Saga immediately got out of control, and the additional free spells and mana acceleration of Urza's Legacy didn't particularly help, but we'll tackle that particular bugbear of a set later. I am a big fan of writer Jesse Mason's blog Killing a Goldfish, which is a series of essays discussing Magic's design block by block. Now, he and I started our projects around the same time, so it's not a case of plagiarism, and he and I have different focuses and narrative elements. So if you love my show and haven't given Jesse Mason's blog a read, you need to. Anyway, in his discussion of Saga Block, a commenter characterized Wizards' final word on Saga as, broken things happen with this block, so therefore Urza's Saga must have been all about broken things. Now, I don't hold that to be true. There's a lot of cool, fun cards and mechanics going on in Urza's Saga. The Echo cards are good. There are some incredible tools for control players, even if I don't love all of them. I'm looking at you, Wildfire. And Cradle Guard, Wild Dog, Pouncing Jaguar, these are all some valid approaches to making green tournament competitive again, though it focused on speed too much and not the trademark resilience of size that green was really allowed to develop later. There were some very valid developments in Saga towards making the 5 colors balanced. Cycling is an amazing mechanic that makes players make interesting, engaging decisions. Echo was a valid experiment, but Wizards didn't quite push it far enough in the set to really get players acquainted with it. And while Saga Draft was a very unbalanced format, with Black having the bulk of the power, it was positively received, making it more versatile than Ice Age Block. Saga was more fun to draft than succeeding large set as well, so that's cool. For my final verdict score, I've got to say that I like a lot of what Urza Saga is trying to do. There are lots of fun, powerful cards that aren't broken that can make games interesting and different that players just don't expect. But like my Meriden score, if a set drives tournament players away with utterly broken cards, it needs to be harshly judged. The natural score of Urza Saga should be a 7, but I'm going to have to give it a 2-point mark down to 5, average. There are some really high highs and some really low lows with Urza Saga, but don't let the grade scare you off. Experiment with some of these cards, and I'm sure you'll love them. As always, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and as you might expect, next time we're going to continue forward with Urza's Legacy, a set that continues to push the envelope in a more creature-oriented fashion. Well, that's the next Magic episode. There's another special coming next time, and this time we're dedicating it to one of the most beloved media franchises of all time. Yeah, we're tackling Star Trek, the Next Generation CCG. It's Trek's 50th anniversary, and I love the show, I love the franchise, so allow me a bit of digression. And it's a really interesting trading card game with some fascinating decisions, some of them genius, and some of them absolutely terrible. So stay tuned, we're going to give you more lore and tech galore. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what your favorite card from Urza Saga is. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games, and good luck. In his own words, Mark Rosewater describes Urza. System is down, 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 doom, 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 da 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 da. There's an outtake for you.